From inside the Banner offices along the Inner Harbor, it is the Banner Baseball Show. Paul Mancano, joined by Kyle Goon, columnist extraordinaire, man about town, man who knows his way around French food, who is going to give me many recommendations when I make a trip to France later this summer. Kyle, you came in with a bunch of French food today, and it was delicious.
I'm a croissant connoisseur, as they say.
Do they say that in French?
Yeah, I just need to make sure you had enough sugar to get in the intro, and man, in an enclosed space, that really hits.
It really hits, right? Really breaks the eardrums. The it is really wakes you up. If you weren't awake before, you are now. We are going to talk on this podcast about an Orioles offense that does not seem to be awake, and whether there's anything that the Orioles can do to fix their offense, to fix this losing streak that they are mired in. But first, let's get a word from our sponsor.
For the fifth year in a row, Toyota is the best resale value brand according to Kelley Blue Book's KBB.com, including the 2025 Grand Highlander, best in resale value for midsize SUVs. Toyota, let's go places.
All right, Kyle. Orioles are beginning a series today at Oriole Park at Camden Yards against the Washington Nationals. Little home and home against their not in-state rivals, but rivals down 95. And boy, are they desperate for some wins at this point. They are 12 games under 500. They just got swept by the Twins for the second time in 2 weeks. And to me, the issues that the starting pitching has had on this team have faded into the past as I've turned my attention to the offense, because we knew through the first month of the season that the starting pitching was not going to carry this team. And frankly, I think once you saw Grayson Rodriguez go down with injury in spring training, once you saw Zach Eflin go down for an extended amount of time, you figured that the starting rotation would struggle, and it has. But to me, the bigger issue right now is that the Orioles bats have not woken up. Right now, they are 23rd in the league in OPS. They're 26th in batting average. They were shut out for the 6th time this season. They were shut out 8 times all of last year, and we're in the middle of May. They've already been shut out 6 times so far. So to me, Kyle, the bigger story right now is an offense that just cannot seem to get its feet under them.
Yeah, I think that's been pretty shocking. And, you know, it feels like the Orioles either have it or they don't sometimes. I mean, yesterday, just not getting a lot of guys on base, not a lot of great at bats. And we see those patterns kind of over and over again, especially throughout these 2 series with the Twins. Just guys just not making the most of their appearances and not making competitive. I mean, they had the Twins bullpen on the ropes yesterday, and then Chris Paddock comes in and pitches a shutout. So and he's not having his best season, right? So it's just really weird. They feel very timid. They feel a lot of double play balls yesterday. Just hitting things into the ground when you need something in the air.
Something that they didn't do at all last year. They hit into the fewest double plays ever.
Yeah, and it's just to kind of emphasize. I mean, the team's talked a lot about the injuries and talked a lot about guys who aren't here. And I realized that Jordan Westberg would be a huge part of this team. But I mean, you got Gunnar Henderson. You got Adley Rutschman. You got Jackson Holliday, a former #1 pick. You've got Cedric. You've got Ryan Mountcastle. You got Ryan O'Hearn. These are the guys when this team was competitive, when they won 100 games 2 seasons ago. They were the engines of this offense, and it was an unstoppable offense in many ways. And it's just to see that regression. I know a lot of people are perplexed, and so am I.
Yeah, no, it defies logic at this point that all these guys are struggling at once. And there's been a lot of emphasis placed on their struggles with runners in scoring position, which is totally understandable because they are last in baseball in OPS with runners in scoring position. They're last in batting average. They're last in walks with runners in scoring position. But they're also 28th in plate appearances with runners in scoring position. So they're not getting guys on. So yes, they're struggling when those guys are on, but they got to get more guys on base. And so the issues of them being able to drive in the guys that are on base, to me, pale in comparison to the fact that it's just an overall problem. It's not like they are hitting and then all of a sudden they stop when guys reach second or third base. They are just flat out having uncompetitive at-bats, having unconsequential innings, and it's absolutely killing this team right now because anytime, like the game that they went down yesterday in the second game of their doubleheader, Tomoyuki Sugano, goes down 3-0, and you say game's over. At this point, you have very little faith that this offense is going to be able to pull them out of any kind of doldrums.
And I mean, that's a good start. That's a good start for Tomoyuki. I mean, Tomoyuki Sugano basically hasn't really had a bad start. I mean, maybe the one that got a little short.
Yeah.
But
in the last 5-6 starts, they've been solid.
So, I mean, that should give you a chance. And 2 years ago, that would have given this offense a chance. Too many 3-up, 3-down innings. Too many ground balls. Too many, like you said. I mean, just games where they're not having enough traffic, and you can kind of see it start to wear on the coaching staff a little bit. Brandon Hyde said the other day, the common question from reporters, you can tell when reporters are trying not to step too hard on the people. It's like, Brandon, what did you see out of your lineup? That's our way of saying that was pretty bad, wasn't it?
Yeah.
And so somebody said, what did you see out of the lineup tonight? And he says, not much. And that's as testy as we've seen, because I think it's just sort of like, what is the answer here when not only are you not responding in some of these situational at-bats, but you're just not even getting to the situational at-bats. You just have to have some life in order to get those at-bats where you can get runs.
Yeah, and let's turn our attention to the coaching staff, because I want that to be the bulk of our conversation. You wrote about on the BaltimoreBanner.com, where people can subscribe $1 for 6 months, the other day, about how much blame this coaching staff deserves to shoulder for the team struggles. And you could make a case. We're not immune to it. We're on social media. We see after every game, there are going to be tweets that say, fire Mike Elias, fire Brandon Hyde. We want to bring some sense to that conversation. We want to discuss in plain terms if it would make sense, how it could happen, and why it might not make sense, and just share our perspective on that, because we have a different side of things. And I know there are a lot of people that are frustrated right now and are quick to just jump on the fire somebody boat. And I think that there is a legitimate frustration. There's a legitimate reason for frustration, because when you have all of these guys that we've seen perform at high levels before, Gunnar Henderson, Ryan Mountcastle, Adley Rutschman, Jackson Holliday hasn't done it for an extended stretch in the big leagues, but you've seen it from Cedric Mullins, and you have yet to see some of your higher end prospects, Heston Kjerstad, Kobe Mayo, Holliday, these young guys break out. You're saying, is it more likely that all of these guys suddenly forgot how to hit? Or is it more likely that there is a catalyst to all of this? And the common denominator for all of this is that they're all under the same coaching staff. So I understand that. I also understand the desire to do something, do anything,
right?
Wake up the team, because at some point there have to be consequences for losing. And if you are hoping to save the season, you want to make those moves now, not in July, and certainly not after the season ends, once you are fully out of the playoffs and the entire year is over. So this team is playing lifeless baseball, I think it's fair to say. So you have to have a thing to do. You can't just say do something and assume that, firing anybody, DFAing anybody is going to make sense. But you reach a certain point where the risk of not doing something is a greater risk than making a bold decision, pulling the trigger on something.
Yeah. And I think, it is tricky. And I very much disagree with everybody that wants to clean house on everything, Elias and the whole band. I mean, there's a reason why the Orioles had back-to-back seasons where they had 90+ wins. If you look at the organizations that struggle, they're rudderless. They have no direction. And that's kind of what you risk if you sort of fire everyone at the drop of the hat. On the other hand, I mean, there has to be a trigger here that's pulled.
Right.
And I think there has to be a message either from ownership, the front office, that this is unacceptable. to some level. And maybe that's stirring up the roster. Maybe that's getting rid of one of these vets who hasn't performed. Maybe it's striking out a big trade for one of the vets who hasn't performed. Shaking up this roster somehow, or maybe shaking up the coaching staff. And I think that should be on the tables. And we can talk a little bit about why it's going to be difficult for this front office to decide whether to fire Brandon Hyde, and because of the situation he's put in. And also Mike Elias saying, we back him, we support him. And kind of going back on that is a little bit of well, it's not a little bit. It would be a huge backtrack, right? If you fired Brandon amid this struggle, maybe 2 weeks after saying, "Hey, we support him," but it's just unacceptable.
Yeah,
it's unacceptable for a team that has so many veterans, that has so many guys who have played better than this. They know it. The clubhouse knows it. They know that the standard should be higher. And when you're not meeting the standard, it's just not good enough to be like, oh, well, it's a slow start, or it's a rough patch. It's just, you're one of the worst teams in baseball.
Yeah.
There's no reason for that to happen. If this was a 500 team, I think this would be a very different discussion. It's not. They're one of the worst teams in baseball.
Yeah. And to bridge sports, to change make an analogy from a different sport, it's like watching your team at a basketball game, watching the opponent go on a long run, and the especially on the road, and the crowd is really getting into it, and the coach just refuses to call a timeout and tries to wait for them to get through it, and then it ultimately leads to a massive 3 in transition. The building explodes, you're down 15, and then finally you take the timeout. Timeout's too late at that point. The momentum has shifted, and the momentum right now is going in the wrong direction for this Orioles team. And so doing something to stop it, I think, is important, because yes, you're going to get healthier, but the way that this team is playing right now, there have to be consequences for losing. And there aren't too many triggers that you can pull on the roster. You could DFA Charlie Morton, I suppose, because he's been your worst performing pitcher, but he's been okay out of the bullpen. You could DFA CNL Perez, but because he's struggled out of the bullpen, but I don't know what that really does for your team. None of your lineup pieces are pretty much set in stone. There's not much you can do you're not going to option Adley Rutschman. You're not going to make a brash decision like that. So to me, I think people are naturally looking at the coaching staff. And the one thing I will say for the coaching staff is the coaching staff can't help the injuries. They can't help the fact that Jordan Westburg and Colton Cowser have gone down, and they're significantly hurting this team. And they also were not the ones who signed Charlie Morton to a 1-year deal, or, signed Kyle Gibson, or signed Andrew Kittredge, who could be a contributing piece in this bullpen, but has been injured. So that's should not be laid at Brandon Hyde's feet, the mistakes that Mike Elias made. But at this point, I think it would make much more sense if they were going to make a move in the middle of the season. Very rare you see a GM and executive fire during the season. I also want to say Brandon Hyde and Mike Elias, like you said, Kyle, have overseen this team through some very good years. I mean, they won 101 games 2 years ago. The team
was manager of the year, AL manager of the year.
Yeah.
But that being said, you're in a tough spot when you have 2 series like you just had against the Twins. And that one loss that they had against the Angels, which was sort of very in keeping with these losses that they've had recently, of like, bats never really seem to get going. They don't seem to ever have life at all in the game.
Yeah.
And if Brandon is going to sit there and be like, yeah, I don't know what's going on. I mean, then, that's kind of a tough position to be like, oh, well, this is the leader that we need to get back to the good times. I mean, if he doesn't seem to have a connection with, hey, what's going on with your guys? Why can't this turn around? Why can't there be progress? I mean, that's a bad look.
Yeah.
And that's kind of the antithesis of what you want your coach to be. Somebody who has high accountability and who brings to the guys, listen, we got to turn this around. We're going to figure it out. And then it starts happening. I mean, and you mentioned not a lot of lineup pieces to pull to move. Why? Because this is like 7/9 of the lineup that you want.
Yeah. With the exception of Cowser and Westburg. This is your lineup.
Cowser and Westburg. And even, I mean, some of those replacements haven't been terrible. So it's just got to be better.
Yeah.
There's just not enough excuses to go around to explain why they haven't been able to correct some of these trends with the pieces that they have.
Yeah. At the same time, if you're going to make a decision like firing a manager, firing a coach, you have to have a good reason to do it. And you have to have an end goal. You have to have a purpose and say, what do we want to accomplish with this move? And to me, the reasons that you would consider making a move at manager is one, you think that the players may have tuned out Brandon Hyde and his coaching staff and they're not listening to the message and they would benefit from having a different voice. Two, you want to light a fire under players, give them the, a wake up call and say there are consequences when you perform poorly. And Brandon Hyde, unfortunately, had to be the one to bear the brunt of it, but it could be coming for anybody. And three, you want to change the culture of the clubhouse. I think it has to be one or more of those things if you're going to make a change with Brandon Hyde as manager.
Probably more the way they've set it up. And you've done some good notes here that I'm going to liberally borrow from.
Please.
But
I've thought way too much about this. Me and John Mioli, it's keeping us up.
And I understand, but the fact of the matter is, in the offseason, they defanged Brandon's staff, took a lot of the experience off of it, took off some of his closest friends, and they have a very inexperienced coaching staff now. So there's really two outcomes that come of it, and one is more likely when that happens, when a manager or a coach starts losing his assistants, more times than not, that is the death spiral. That is the, like you're losing your guys and we're going to put in some of our guys. But here in the Orioles organization, it hasn't really changed the philosophy. I mean, Cody Ashe, as we've discussed, he's a guy who got promoted from within. I mean, they're still in the swing decisions, market of teaching, which is not to say that's the wrong ideas. And I think if John were here, he'd probably defend the school of thought. But clearly, it's different voices, the same message, and the biggest difference is that everyone got way younger. So then you're going to take Brandon, who's overseen this team for the last 7 years, and you're going to get rid of him, and then you pull from an assistant pool that is way younger. Some of these guys in their first year in the major, some of these guys in their first year in coaching, and you're going to pick one of those guys to be the new manager of the Orioles. That doesn't make a lot of sense. So I think that is one thing that is perhaps going to have to be a serious consideration for this front office when they try to decide whether or not they're going to make a change.
Yeah, I mean, as is a traditional baseball front office, Mike Elias runs this organization.
Right.
He runs it from top to bottom. David Rubenstein is the owner, but he's empowered Mike Elias to run everything. And there is a philosophy on how to acquire players, what to look for in players, what to teach players that starts at Mike Elias and is spread throughout the entire organization. So if you're going to make a change at any point in your coaching staff, are you really going to deviate from the philosophy that Mike Elias has believed in and that got him here, that got this team to 101 wins, that got them to a very talented roster that is currently underperforming? It's really hard to get people to change their stripes at a certain point. And you mentioned the fact that they made a change at hitting coach. Ryan Fuller, Matt Borg-Schulte moved on to other organizations. And instead of bringing in an outside voice, somebody who had done it in other places and had their own unique style, they promoted Cody Ashe, who is their director of hitting strategy, offensive strategy coach. How really different could the message be when you are really, in essence, doubling down?
And also, we got a chance to talk to Cody on Sunday. And he talked for 15 minutes, and you could kind of tell that it felt like we were sort of orthodontists pulling teeth from him. But he's frustrated. And the thing he kind of hinted at was, we are kind of becoming a clubhouse where guys are sharing wisdom with each other, but 90% of some of the things you learn in a clubhouse really come from other players. And all right, man, like what's your 10% then? Like what is your 10%? What are you adding to this? And I think also he's hinted at something that maybe it's a separate issue, but are these guys communicating the way they need to with each other? And I think it sounds like the coaching staff is trying to push those guys to do peer-to-peer reviews, share information, communicate more. But it still begs the question, which is driving everyone crazy, which is what is this coaching staff doing to change the results? So I think I'm not sure that it totally matters who's coaching this team right now exactly on could they turn it around? But at the same time, if that's the truth, then that's not a good thing to be saying about your coaching staff, that they can't change this group and make them kind of stiffen and get more resilience to their character.
Yeah, and players in any sport, in any situation, do bear the brunt of the results, as they should, because they're the ones that are up there taking these at bats. They're the ones that are up there throwing these pitches. It is them. And so, by the same token, when a player makes a massive leap in their career from year 1 to year 2, that player deserves the bulk of the credit, not necessarily the coach that brought him there. The coach can add things, the coach can make suggestions, he can try to change a player's mindset, but it's up to the player to actually do the thing. He is the man in the arena. So that 90% of that Cody Ashley mentioned of players is peer to peer. They are the guys who have been through the wars together. They see more than the coaches even see. But the coaches still are the common denominator in this situation. And when you're looking at this coaching staff right now, it is an inexperienced group. If you were to move on from Brandon Hyde a year ago, you could say Freddie Gonzalez, who has managed multiple major league teams, might be the guy in waiting. He's moved on. You hired Robinson Chirinos to be your bench coach, who was a nice player for you a couple years ago and certainly could have a long career as a coach in the big leagues. But this is his first year ever as a coach in the big leagues.
First year, any level coaching.
Yeah. So that is a guy who is very new to this side of things. You're talking about a staff right now that has Robinson Chirinos as your bench coach. You've got Tim Cousins as your major league field coordinator / coaching coordinator. He's been with Brandon Hyde. He has been his right-hand man going back a ways. They came over from Chicago together. When the Orioles hired Brandon Hyde in the end at December 2018, they brought over Tim Cousins as well. Those two guys are very close. If you're going to be letting go of Brandon Hyde, I'm not sure Tim Cousins would A, have a different message from Brandon Hyde, or B, even necessarily want to do that. I don't know if he would want to replace somebody that he has been so close with for decades now. And then you've got Buck Britton, who is, I know everybody is, there is a section of the fan base that has been looking at Buck Britton, what he did with AAA Norfolk and worked his way up through the system and looks at his brother Zach and says, this is the next Orioles manager. He is still wet behind the ears when it comes to the major leagues. Never was a major league player, is a major league coach this year, which is kind of a generic title in his first ever year in the major leagues in really any capacity. Cody Ashley is your hitting coach. I don't know if you want to draw from your hitting staff right now if you're looking at an interim manager. Drew French, pitching coach. The pitching staff has also struggled. I don't know if you necessarily want to draw from your pitching staff right now. So even if, for the fans that say, let go of Brandon Hyde, fire Brandon Hyde tomorrow, and you think that you can make a change in mid-May to somehow right the ship and save the season and go on a run, who are you replacing Brandon Hyde with? Who on the staff do you feel like has enough experience, has enough know-how to be able to command this clubhouse in the middle of what would surely be a tumultuous time?
Yeah, in season, I think the options are tough. I will say that I'm not sure if this is an example to follow, but the Rockies, as our O's reporter Danielle Allentuck pointed out to me a few days ago, the Rockies firing Bud Black, hire interim manager Warren Schaefer, who kind of has a similar career trajectory to Buck Britton. Lifetime, Rockies guy or longtime Rockies guy in other facets of the organization. So then you look at Buck from the standpoint of, all right, well, all the young guys on this team have gone through the tides. They've played for Buck. He knows them well. But he doesn't have a decision-making role on the team. I mean, he told the media that a few weeks ago, I believe. And so you go from a guy who's really just gathering string and experience on the major league roster this year, doesn't have a decision-making capacity, and now he's the guy.
Yeah. And if you're an Orioles fan that has an issue with the way the Orioles operate fundamentally, you're not going to get anything different in Buck Britton. You're not going to get anything different in anybody from anybody on the staff.
What would change also? I mean, this front office still provides analytic reports that guide the decision of things like lineups, things like pitching strategy. I mean, frankly, Brandon and Mike are hand in hand in those strategies. So I just don't think you would bring in a manager in season, at least, who would provide a dramatically different approach, other than what this front office has dictated since the rebuild began.
Yeah. And if you are looking to hire from outside the organization for your managerial job in the middle of the season, that is incredibly difficult to do because right now 30 teams have managers. So it's not like the end of the start of a new coaching cycle where all these guys get fired, all these guys refresh the market, so to speak, and you can pull from different places. You also don't have time. I mean, if you're looking to change this thing and to turn this season around and to go on a run in the final 4.5 months of the season, how are you going to conduct a managerial search that is going to have enough candidates? I mean, are you doing it behind the scenes as Brandon Hyde is still your manager? That's not a safe situation. That's not a good situation at all to have. You don't want to have somebody be your lame duck coach manager, so to speak, while you're interviewing other candidates behind the scenes. And you want a team to be thorough with this. This is a big job. This is a big decision. So,
also it might be, I mean, if Mike fires Brandon, it might be the last big decision he makes as general manager.
It's kind of his last lever to pull.
Right. So it's a bigger decision than people make. And I think, or than people make of it right now. I mean, I do think sometimes on teams, the team goes through its first slide and people are like, okay, just fire the coach. I do think in this case, it's worth discussing just because of how much they've underachieved. But I mean, all these factors around it, plus the idea that when Mike fires Brandon Hyde, all right, like you have removed a sort of insulating barrier to the accountability, and now all eyes are on you, and all eyes are on every decision you make. So I do think, one, Mike and Brandon have worked closely for a long time, and Mike is giving Brandon some grace because of some of the injuries they've had this year. But at the same time, if you're Mike, you probably hold off on pulling that lever as long as possible, because once you remove Brandon, there's nothing between you and the blame and the scapegoating for what's happened to this team.
Well said. And people might look back to 2010, which was the last time that the Orioles fired a manager in the middle of the season. Dave Tremblay started out that season as their manager. He went 15-39 at the helm. They fire him. They go with third base coach Juan Samuel, who went 17-34 in his stretch. And then Buck Showalter got hired in late July of that season. Lit a fire under the team. He brought in his own message. He changed the culture. He went 34-23 in the second half. They missed the playoffs in 2011, but then they go on their stretch in 2012, 2014, 2016. At that point, though, when Buck Showalter was hired, the season was over. Season was over by July. The Orioles were completely out of it. So you would have to believe that somebody that you were bringing in right now, you were giving up on the season if you were firing Brandon Hyde, going with an interim and looking and begin to interview other managerial candidates. It's just not a tenuous. It is a tenuous situation. It's not a situation you want to be in. And frankly, if you're bringing in somebody right now from the outside, this person is probably going to be an experienced big league manager, is the thinking. If you're not comfortable with the candidates you have in-house, so you're, I'm not saying hire Buck Showalter, but a Buck Showalter type, somebody who's managed at other big league teams. Let's say they want to go hire Bud Black, who was just managing the Rockies, as you mentioned. That this guy who's coming in is coming into a very difficult situation, which a lot of managers don't want to do, and taking over a clubhouse that is losing, and suddenly they have all the pressure on the world on them with a clubhouse they haven't met before to have to win. I frankly would have a hard time accepting that job unless it was my first job in the big leagues. And two, they have to have assurances that they're going to be able to manage this team the way that they want to manage this team. And I'm not sure they would be able to get those assurances from this front office the way that things are currently structured.
Yeah, and I think two is kind of a legitimate concern. Although I think, if anything, this season should be a referendum on how much control Mike has and how much accountability he has to the ownership group, which I think largely has deferred to him. I think all the messaging I've ever gotten from David Rubenstein and Michael Arrighetti and their camps has been, "Hey, it's Mike's show. He got us to this point. When they took over the team last year, we're going to let him run it as things, as he sees fit." I do think this season has to be a reflection on is there a check or a balance for what he does. But on the other hand, I mean, I actually disagree a little bit with your first point that maybe you wouldn't want to take this job. I mean, again, the pieces are there,
Sure.
and we're also if like let's take that 2010 timeline and say maybe they kind of take stock and want to hire somebody late summer because frankly giving up on the season, well, that might be a decision that the team makes for them, right? I mean, if this team keeps playing at the rate that they're playing, losing at the rate they're losing, this season will be over by the end of the month. So if you're an experienced manager, hey, they have Gunnar Henderson. Hey, like Adley Rushman hasn't been good for a year, but he was good before that. Jackson has shown signs. You still have a good young roster under team control for a while. And actually, I think the ground is very fertile to find a way to make this team good again. So I actually would disagree with the first point. But the second point is a more interesting one to me.
That's fair. This is definitely, of all the jobs in baseball, I mean, when you look just purely at the roster, you look at the situation, you look at the fact that, they have an owner who maybe will want to spend even more next year. We're going to keep saying that every year, but you never know. I mean, you look at the situation and it's overall pretty good. I mean, for example, I would not want to take over the Rockies situation right
No.
now. That is
I wouldn't want to take over the Pirates. I mean,
who just fired Derek Shelton.
Right. And it's just, I think the Orioles are in better position. Dave Rubenstein has said at least once, and the payroll is up. I mean, I know it's not distributed how people want. I mean, 15 million to Charlie Morton or whatever, but the payroll's up. And David Rubenstein has said in the past, yeah, I might need to spend with more urgency because I'm in my 70s and I want to see a championship.
Right.
So I think all those factors are actually positively aligned for the Orioles. The question is, okay, like, is whatever is going on in the clubhouse this year, this lack of resilience, this lack of fight, is that a coaching culture problem or is that a player culture problem? And can that be corrected if it is sort of a player driven problem? I mean, I think we have seen over maybe the last year or two sort of this idea that this player group is a little quieter. They need sort of a fiery vet. I think that's why Kyle Gibson is back, frankly, because in 2023, he was kind of a voice of clubhouse. And they're sort of like, okay, well, Kyle isn't a great starter right now, but let's bring him in and see if he can stir things up. And I think that's sort of the thinking behind that move. So that's the real question I would want to know if you're going to bring in a coach and if you were trying to be the new coach of the Orioles, what's that culture problem actually about?
Yeah, and we are live on YouTube and on X. If you're watching, give us a comment, give us a 5-star review. If you're listening anywhere that you get your podcasts, I saw a comment as well about Joe Madden and the possibility of somebody who has had a ton of experience in the big leagues and has had experience taking a young team over the hump, obviously, with the Chicago Cubs. And it made me think back to the discussions that we had when the Orioles first hired Brandon Hyde, which was, is Brandon Hyde going to be the manager just for the rebuild, or is he going to see this thing through? And it's rare that a manager sticks around from the rebuild until they reach the pinnacle. And it is impressive, frankly, that he was able to stay here and see this team to a 100-win season and a division championship, because both the organizations that both Brandon Hyde and Mike Elias came from moved on from their managers. They both went through significant total rebuilds, and both those teams let go of their manager in order to pick somebody else and get them over the hump. So their managers for the rebuild were just that. They were just kind of placeholders. Brandon Hyde made it to the other side. And I do want to also say, for his sake, I mean, from our perspective in the media, he has been good to deal with. He has been, a steady presence. And from what we've heard, the team has not tuned him out. It's just a matter of how effective he is at this point. And so that's the frustrating part, I think, right now. And frankly, given the track record that he has built for himself, talk about it from like NFL perspectives, that a coach who is struggling kind of gets allowed to pull some levers on his own coaching staff before they give him the pink slip. I mean, I would seriously consider making a change for your hitting staff. I think that is an area that, probably needs to be overhauled in some way, because clearly the message is not getting through.
Yeah. Yeah. Just, I mean, someone who I, it's so funny because I feel like, especially with John, I'm sure you guys talk so much about technicals. I mean, and Andy Koska had a story today about the hard hit rate and the sweet spots. And it's like, I mean, shoot, like I hate to be this guy that's sort of the eye test versus analytics guy, but like, let's see some passion. Let's see some fire. Like, that's what's missing here. That's what's really missing from this whole mix of just, you guys are going out in this such a sleepy, meek way. And that is just the opposite of 2023. That is just the opposite of what they did. Comeback wins, one run wins, just never being out of the game. And I know that had a lot to do with the pitching, the bullpen, which maybe just haven't been as strong this year. But I mean, shoot, like, it's just timely hits, guys who were getting runs across. I think also something that was sort of envisioned this year, or at least talked about, was, being more of an athletic, we're going to steal bases, we're going to get extra bases type team. Has that happened? It hasn't. And somebody has to answer for that strategy and those shortcomings. Just the passion element of it, and the total baseball, we are going to take every extra base we can. That just hasn't happened. So I think somebody has to answer for it, whether it's Brandon Hyde or Mike or anyone in this organization.
Yeah. All right. That's a good long conversation about the coaching staff of this team, but I think we should do a minor league check-in, Kyle. Let's look down to the farm. And last week we talked about some of the pitching that the Orioles could be getting at some point in the 2026, 2027 range. Let's talk about Enrique Bradfield Jr., former Orioles first-round pick, because he is currently rehabbing. He's making his way back up to Double-A Chesapeake. He is in High-A Aberdeen as we speak. Had a couple hits in his first 2 games with Aberdeen. The Orioles' number 6 prospect, according to Baseball America. Already stole a base, by the way, as he's coming back, because of course he did. Would be fascinating to see where Enrique Bradfield Jr. ends up by season's end, because the Orioles, they've been slow with pitchers. They have not been afraid to move hitters up with expediency when they feel like the guy is ready for the next stage. And if Enrique Bradfield Jr., who was hitting well in Double-A before he suffered his injury, if he jumps right back on in Chesapeake and does excellently, I wouldn't be shocked to see him end up in Norfolk by season's end.
Yeah, and I think that'd be great. And I think, especially for what we're talking about, guys who can kind of play the total game. Enrique, maybe not quite there with the hitting tool, but if he gets on base, he's a threat. And I feel like, the O's. I know people have mixed feelings about Jorge Mateo, but the O's have an affinity for that type of guy with that kind of speed. And obviously the future of Cedric Mullins is sort of up in the air, especially with how he's been playing this month. So yeah, I mean, I think Enrique, you gotta move him up. You gotta challenge him we'll see where the hitting is, but the speed obviously is there, and the Orioles love having that kind of guy.
Yeah, so we'll see. I mean, at this point, I told John last week, I just hope this doesn't turn into a minor league podcast because
it does take you back when you said, let's look at the farm. It's like, okay, this is probably taking you back a little bit.
It's and I thought it would be nostalgic, but instead is just a little bit more depressing. At Kyle Goon is his handle. I'm at Paul Mancano and at Old Banner Sports. Thanks so much for tuning in. Kyle has some awesome work on the BaltimoreBanner.com. In particular, you took aim at somebody who was also taking aim at the Orioles O during the anthem, and kind of a clapback piece, if you will, which is especially...
Don't tell us how to live, Virginia.
Especially timely.
Don't tell us how to live.
Especially timely now that the Nationals are back in town.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Any Washington fans who want to complain about the Baltimore O, take a read of that piece. Stay out of my mentions. I'm not responding to you. The column it stands on its own. There you go. There it is. Deal with it or don't.
Yep. All right. Fair enough. Thanks so much for tuning in. I'll be back next week sometime with John Mioli.